But people are dying with vaping.
Washington State needs bold action.
Once considered safer than smoking, vaping has now ignited a public health crisis with thousands of lung injuries and 39 vaping-related deaths nationwide.
Tobacco companies are targeting towards kids.
The state has just banned flavored vape liquids for the next 4 months.
It's been devastating.
But will the ban do more harm than good?
Now you're going to see more problems.
What should state lawmakers do next?
We had about a 50% increase in our 12th graders vaping.
Our experts weigh in.
Shutting down an industry statewide is an immense government overreach.
Clearing the air on vaping. Next on City Inside Out. Welcome to this edition of City Inside Out. I'm your host, Brian Callanan. As of early November, the Centers for Disease Control says lung illness associated with e-cigarettes or vaping has caused more than 36 deaths and over 2,000 injuries nationwide, including 14 injuries in our state. Local leaders say this is part of a vaping epidemic, and the State Board of Health has enacted a temporary ban on flavored vapes as a way to keep kids, especially, away from vaping. But are flavored vapes the reason people are getting sick? And could a ban on these products create a black market with even more dangerous health outcomes? Those are the questions people in the vaping industry are asking, as a decision to permanently ban flavored vapes now heads to the state legislature. Vaping and e-cigarettes. Their popularity, especially with young people, has been growing exponentially.
Scary? Yeah, scary.
But there's a growing concern, too. From local schools all the way to the White House, that vaping, touted as safer than smoking, could be a killer.
But people are dying with vaping.
Vapes are battery-powered devices that heat a liquid, most often containing nicotine, vegetable glycerin, propylene glycol, and flavoring, into an aerosol that a person inhales. And that mixture, state and local leaders say, is a recipe for a public health crisis.
Today, I'm announcing an executive order to help make our state safer.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee called for a temporary ban on flavored vapes this fall as a way to stop children, in particular, from vaping.
It's time for the state of Washington to protect these kids, and that's what we're doing.
The State Board of Health voted to approve the 4-month ban in October, amidst a wave of vaping-related illnesses and deaths nationwide, including 14 reported illnesses in Washington.
This is ridiculous!
Critics say the state is killing businesses. Sales have dropped by 70% at eCig and Vape in Burien since the ban was put in place.
We're hoping for the best, but if it doesn't lift, there's really no way that we can survive.
But Julie Anderson and other vape store managers, now down to selling tobacco flavors only, say the loss of business isn't the only problem.
This will vaporize a lot more of the liquid.
In the outbreak of lung illnesses associated with vaping, the Centers for Disease Control has not narrowed down an exact cause, but most of the cases involve vape juice that includes the psychoactive chemical THC, mixed in by people experimenting at home or illicit drug dealers.
They've now identified that it has nothing to do with vapes like we sell it.
Anderson worries the flavored vape ban will either push people back to smoking or increase illicit vaping activity.
So now you have a worse black market. Now you're going to see more problems.
E-liquid producer Clint Pettee adds, taking away flavored vapes hurts the many people like him who've stopped smoking tobacco cigarettes and are reducing the amount of nicotine they're taking in, thanks to vaping.
We've allowed these products, we've allowed the education, we've gotten the people to switch, and then we've taken it away from them.
Some studies support Pettee's point that vaping may help smokers end their nicotine addiction. But when larger e-cig companies target kids with ads that make vapes look like candy or cookies, Pettee admits there's a problem.
The same companies that were putting pictures of, unicorns dancing across the rainbow on their bottle are still available today.
Pettee says the FDA, which has been fighting to regulate vaping for more than a decade, has the authority to go after companies marketing to kids. It's just not happening enough.
And that's one of the fundamental problems that we have with rules and regulations. When they are not enforced, then the problems continue.
The biggest problem, says 14-year-old Olive Smith, is that vaping is simply not a smart choice.
There are still taking in nicotine, and it is still being harmful to them.
Smith testified before the Board of Health last month.
A non-nicotine influenced future. Thank you.
Boo! She was shouted down with boos and yelling from pro-vaping voices at a very emotional hearing.
It was just really uncomfortable for me to have so much backlash.
Smith points out that nicotine use has a negative impact on the brain chemistry of young people and says a ban on flavored vapes is sorely needed, with so many kids getting hooked on vaping.
There's obviously something wrong and it needs to be stopped, and I think an outright ban is really the only way to go about this.
Researcher Susan Collins wants another option.
This situation calls for the finely wielded scalpel of regulation versus, just a hacksaw of prohibition.
Collins, co-director of the Harm Reduction Research and Treatment Center at the UW, agrees that youth vaping is not healthy.
Keep nicotine out of the hands of kids.
But she says bans, like the prohibition of alcohol in our country, have historically not been effective and also hamper research. Collins says linking legitimately produced flavored vapes with lung illness has created confusion. On a public health issue, the state should try to control, not ban.
We can more tightly regulate things in a precise way that really maximizes public health benefit and minimizes safety concerns.
We aren't done in this discussion.
The governor is pushing for a permanent flavored vape ban from state lawmakers this spring, an effort many applaud. But others say it's a plan with a cloudy future.
If any kids are vaping, that's a big problem.
To me, this is a huge harm reduction that works.
I hope that they can see through that fog to really help us all stay safer and healthier here in Washington State.
And joining us to discuss this further, we have with us Sarah Ross-Vile. She is the former Director of Tobacco Studies in the UW's Department of Health Services. Sarah, good to have you.
Thank you.
We also have with us Josh Baba. He is the General Manager of Galaxy Vapor, who has a number of stores in the area. Josh, good to have you too.
Thank you.
All right, let's launch right into this. I'm going to start with a very basic question that I know has a very complex answer. And Sarah, I'll start with you here. Do you support the state's ban on flavored vapes? Yes or no, and why?
I do support the state's ban on flavored vapes at this time. I think it's too late, and I think it's only using one tool that we have in the big toolbox of how we prevent youth getting addicted to nicotine and even how we address nicotine addiction in our whole state. There's a lot more we can do, and it's really unfortunate that we had to wait for acute illness and injury to prompt us to do something about how many youth are getting addicted to nicotine in Washington, new addictions related to e-cigarette and vaping use.
Okay, thank you for that. And we're going to dive into some of those issues throughout our discussion here. Josh, your thoughts here. Do you support this ban on flavored vapes, yes or no, and tell us why, please.
Surprise, surprise. Yeah. No, I absolutely do not. I think it's going to push more people back to smoking combustible cigarettes, which we know kill about 500,000 people every year in the United States, which is really unfortunate. And I think it's also harmful because it's confusing to people and not really giving them the truth on the vapor illness that is harming people and killing people right now, with the FDA and CDC confirming now that at least 93% of these vape illness cases are coming from illicit black market THC cartridges.
Yeah, and let's dive into that very issue here. Sarah, I'll start with you here, and we will talk about the impacts of the ban in just a little bit, but the CDC is saying, as Josh mentioned here, a lot of these cases involve THC, and some people are getting confused here. So why put a ban on flavored vapes when that does not appear to be the major culprit behind these injuries and deaths?
I think it was a prompt to regulators to feel like they had to do something. I'm not going to go inside the brains.
Sure.
We can hear from our governor, as we just heard in that intro there. You know, while the majority of cases do seem linked to either co-use of nicotine and THC in a single product or to THC, there is a block of them that are related to nicotine alone. And in fact, we recently had our first Washington citizen die, and that seems to be, from what we can see at this point,
yes,
in the state of Oregon, yeah, seems to be linked to a nicotine product that was purchased. So I don't know all the details of that case. And any injury and death is really unfortunate. I think the prompt that happened for folks was seeing, wow, we've really let this get out of control. We had about a 50% increase in our 12th graders vaping just from 1 year of surveillance to the next year of surveillance, and we really need to step in and do something, and it hasn't happened at the federal level from the FDA. So I think it's our regulators also trying to catch up, which I do think adds to a confusion around getting great messaging out there about specifically how to avoid vaping-related injury and illness.
Got it. And Josh, I'll bring you in here just to flip the question around here. We are clearly in the middle of a health crisis. I don't think anyone would argue that. THC definitely a big problem, but we have seen some of these nicotine-only cases, and the governor is saying for the sake of keeping younger kids from starting to vape, we need to have this flavored vape ban. Do you see his point of view or what Sarah is trying to get across here?
Well, I actually disagree that there have been lung injury cases of nicotine-only products. These are based on self-reported surveys.
Okay.
And the 93% of people from the FDA and CDC have self-reported that they are using black market illicit products. And you might wonder that last 7% now, maybe they don't want to admit to a felony. And so, that makes it really tough, and especially when you look at, cases in other countries, or like the UK, where they have vapor stores actually inside of hospitals.
Yeah.
And they're advertised as being at least 95% safer than smoking combustible cigarettes.
Yeah.
It feels like, having this knee-jerk reaction to essentially shutting down an industry statewide is an immense government overreach that's harmed a lot of lives.
Josh, though, I need to press it here. When you see the vape juice that looks like candy, when you see these headlines saying youth vaping levels are skyrocketing, do you feel responsible for that? I mean, what's your reaction when you see that news?
I'm really disappointed in the lack of reasonable regulations that our government has put in. I took essentially 2 months off of trying to manage my own business this past year, going around to state legislators asking them for reasonable regulation. For instance, in the UK, they report about a 1.6% youth vaping rate. And what they did is they put a cap on nicotine concentration.
Right.
And Juul, is the market leader.
Right.
And they their main product has 3 times the concentration of the max amount allowed in the UK.
Right.
And that's not the product that the traditional dedicated vapor stores are selling.
Yeah.
And so we're getting blamed for this youth vaping epidemic when really it's this concentration of nicotine that is just sky high.
Yeah, and I'm going to dive into some of those issues in a bit too. Thanks for bringing it up here. But I do want to talk about the impact of this ban, short-term, long-term. And Josh, you've touched on this already, but if you could start here, impact on your business, impact on the industry, and maybe impact on public health too.
So my business, I had 5 stores, 3 under the name Galaxy Vapor, and over the summer with the taxes coming in, we expanded to having a couple of kind of mixed stores, and where we sold other tobacco products and stuff, just trying to, there was another vapor store owner that he knew he was going to end up going out of business, and we felt for him. He's my neighbor, actually.
Sure.
And so we said, hey, let's take over your lease. We'll put some other products in here. We'll at least get you out of that liability.
Yeah.
But once that flavor ban became apparent it was going to hit, we shut down 3 of the 5 stores. And the 3 stores that we did shut down were because our landlords were kind enough. They're small business people themselves, and they saw, okay, this is 80% of what this long-term tenant of mine is sold. We're going to allow them out of the lease fairly quickly. The other 2 stores, unfortunately for us, they said, no, we're not letting you out of the lease as quickly as you might like. And so we've been forced more to keep 2 of them open. I had to lay off 12 employees.
Yeah.
3 of which, by the way, are past felons. They have felonies.
Wow.
And it's been extremely disappointing that, where are they going to go now to find, fulfilling work where they feel like they're helping people?
Right.
I've lost the majority of my income. I've been, this isn't a case of, just making less money.
Yeah.
This is, shutting down business, letting employees go. I'm driving for Uber and Lyft now to pay bills. I'm applying for jobs like crazy myself.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to help my dad find a way where he doesn't have to sell his house and move to Arizona or something.
Well, fair enough. And if I can, I'm going to move to some of the public health impacts here. And Sarah, I'll bring you in because I know some adults would say they're using vaping to quit nicotine. Some schools are telling us that kids are self-medicating with vaping because they're so stressed out. So just looking at that public health piece here, when you put a ban like this in place, what impacts do you think it's going to have short-term, long-term? Is it going to stop people from vaping?
I think it'll have an impact on the youth because youth report that flavors are what bring them to the product. Josh is making comparisons to the UK. We have to understand that the regulatory system is really different in the UK, and we could learn a lot. You can't advertise these products online in the UK. That makes a huge amount of difference. That's equal or greater than what a flavor ban would do for youth. So we're not using the tools that we could be using locally or nationally at all. I think it's important that we drive down our youth addiction rate. The difference between what tobacco products youth were formerly using before vaping products came to the market is that degree of addiction and the frequency of use. And so we're now seeing 10th graders saying, I wish I could quit. And we didn't used to see that. And we don't really have tools to help addicted youth because it hasn't really been that big of an issue before. We can help them stop, but being physiologically addicted hasn't been an issue. As far as the cessation problem, I think a place where Josh and I really agree is that people shouldn't be using combustible tobacco products. Cigarettes kill half the people who use them, and they shorten their lives by 10 years. It's a devastating public health problem, and you have to ask yourself, why do we have an industry that does that in our country? And you brought up Juul. Juul's a company that's learned from the tobacco industry playbook, how to develop an addictive product and even how to market it to youth. But what is that line between reaping any potential benefit from a vaping product versus just having a product on the market that's going to cause additional addiction? And certainly I know folks, I'm sure you know many more folks than I do, who this is the way they've quit smoking. But at a population level, most folks end up using both products at once. Maybe reducing their combustible cigarette smoking, but that actually doesn't have that big of a health benefit, unfortunately, because cigarettes are so deadly that even just using a few a day doesn't help you out that much. And they might miss a quit attempt that way. So what is our pathway to find something that works? And I think the FDA has a lot of responsibility in this. When nicotine gum came to the market, it was so tightly regulated for what flavors could be in it. And here we have all these flavors being sold in all sorts of ways. And we've really let that get away from us, despite all we know about how we can regulate tobacco effectively.
Josh, you wanted to jump in here.
Yeah, Sarah, you mentioned, we're not seeing the type of, cessation levels at the population level. And, just drawing back to the UK and looking at their policies and regulations, they are seeing massive decreases in smoking combustible cigarettes at the population level. And a lot of that, I think, can be attributed to, government action and actually being in support of vaping being a cessation tool. And I think one of the issues that we run into here in the U.S. is that we have the Master Settlement Agreement, where the states have actually tied themselves to cigarette revenue. And if you actually, it's really interesting, if you look at the states, the governors that have implemented these flavor bans, all of a sudden, when it has nothing to do with the flavors, these are all states that sold a good portion of their cigarette bonds 20 years ago. And so it's Massachusetts, New York, Michigan, and Washington, of course. So, I think it feels fairly disingenuous to ban something where anecdotally at least, and you see in other countries, it really is helping people quit combustible cigarettes. And yet now you're banning this product that doesn't have to do with the lung illnesses we're seeing. And yet these states actually, you could say you're going into debt or you're losing money because you're losing out on the cigarette tax revenue.
Sarah, you gave me that look. What did you want to throw in here?
A lot of the master settlement funds are guaranteed. It is tied to sales and proportionate to sales. I don't think you could talk to a single person in Olympia who's going to point to that as a reason they're regulated. I've heard this argument. I think it's specious. The thing that does matter to me at the state budget level is that we take in $500 million of tobacco excise taxes every year, and we spend $1.5 million on prevention, treatment, and control directly. And I think that really points to how we're not focused on the nicotine and tobacco epidemic problem in our state. And so we have to find any little sliver of light we can, and it looks like a lot of promise for my friends who've been addicted to nicotine and who quit when they had kids or tried to shift to a product that may or may not be less harmful, though the science is still out on that, that we could be investing this money that we're taking off of folks who are addicted to reinvesting in the things that we know work to help people quit and helping to create environments and policies that really enable quitting and don't make it such a struggle for folks that they have to turn to a product that doesn't even have pre-market approval from the FDA at this point for safety and effectiveness.
I 100% agree with you. It's crazy that only that portion amount of money has gone to has gone to prevention. I mean that's wrong. And you're right. You're not going to find people in Olympia that point to that because they don't want to talk about it.
Well, can I jump in though, Josh, in looking at this and trying to be pragmatic about it at the state level? Heard a lot of shouting at that Board of Health meeting. I know there's a lot of lawsuits flying around right now. Is there any room to negotiate with state lawmakers right now on this? We've got a short session coming up. Do you see any possibility of something like that happening?
There might be a possibility. Unfortunately, whatever base of small businesses there was to go and talk with legislators, the damage has, the considerable amount of damage has already been done.
Yeah.
You know, you look at an example like mine where, you know, I had 5 stores and I had a $65,000 a month payroll going out to my employees, and I had to lay, you know, 90% of them off. And, you know, what time and money, what profit is my business generating that I can afford to spend time in Olympia or pay a lobbyist? And, you know, you expand that to the other, you know, 300 dedicated vapor stores in the state, and, you know, what base is there to go and negotiate? So it's like they just took an industry, they killed it, and now, you know, there's not going to be anybody to go and negotiate and talk with them.
Yeah, and I know, Sarah, this makes for an interesting time, because when you ban something, it makes it difficult to study. You're not able to see these different cases as they're coming through because fewer people are actually using this stuff. And I thought Susan Collins, who you heard from in our setup piece there, made an interesting point. Maybe not a ban, but something with stronger regulation would be a better answer here. Do you agree with that? I just wonder if a black market is going to emerge, as a few people have said. Your thoughts about that, the ban versus regulation?
I mean, a ban versus regulation is a bit of equivocation to me, because this product hasn't been banned. It's the flavors that are banned.
Fair enough. Okay.
And, you know, folks may find other ways to get them across state lines, et cetera.
Yeah.
I think we do need to look at what is the window in which, you know, for which people who are currently using combustible products does this product really work, and how does it work? There's a great study, you know, the one kind of golden random control trial that we have showing that e-cigarettes were more effective than nicotine replacement therapy, the patch, the gum, the stuff we're used to, the patch specifically in this study, at helping folks quit. It also found that those folks were still addicted to nicotine, so still using vaping products a year after the study. We don't know what that means long term, because these products can be so addictive. Does that mean people cycle back to combustible products? Or what are the long-term problems with use? We've seen just recently an emerging animal study showing that there is some changes to DNA, some precancerous lesions that are starting, you know, in a mice population.
Sure.
I'm not a mouse, you're not a mouse.
Right.
So the science is still out, and there's kind of a battery of evidence right now around respiratory effects, apart from the vaping illness piece. So we're really still forming our knowledge on that. But given how dangerous tobacco smoke is, and I think the 95% is a little bit kind of based on, you know, folks in the UK kind of sit around talking with each other several years ago. So I don't know how they would revisit that number at that point. But tobacco's deadly, so it's going to likely be less harmful. But how do we get that to the public?
Right.
I think if you can already see the epidemic in youth, which we can, and youth who are so addicted to these products, we need to take action.
Okay, Josh, you put your hand up.
Yeah. So you know, the 95% wasn't just some people in the UK sitting around and deciding, well, this has got to be at least, you know, 95% safer. This is information that's updated every other year, and it's put out by Public Health England. And Public Health England actually blew the whistle on cigarettes causing cancer and being deadly 2 years. They were the first ones in the world, 2 years before the United States and FDA did. And so they, you know, this is the Public Health England is like the FDA, CDC, American Cancer Society, all rolled into one. The authors of this study that they update every other year are their best tobacco control people. So we have a whole country that's actually putting tens of millions of dollars into researching this product and its respiratory effects.
Well, let me take it to that national level if I could, because I know the FDA has had a struggle, to say the least, at regulating vaping for the past decade. There's been some pushback from the vaping industry, that's for sure. Would you, Josh, welcome more federal oversight of your industry? You know, the president's calling for a ban on flavored vapes too. Let me know about that federal piece, please.
Yeah, I think that the federal ban is very similar to the ban we have in Washington. It's not quite as devastating because it allows menthol, but it still, you know, what the studies have also shown is that people have more success on quitting cigarettes when they actually get away from the tobacco and menthol flavors.
Yeah, the taste, right.
Yeah, and you know, anything they can do to disassociate the habit with their old cigarette habit, because cigarettes are still more addictive. And so, you know, I still have a huge problem with what the FDA is trying to do with banning of flavors, and it, again, feels like they're just trying to clear the market maybe for some bigger players to come in.
Well, when you have the unicorns dancing on the rainbows, I mean, that's the tough part. I think a lot of people see.
100% agree with those types of reasonable regulations. Let's get rid of anything cartoons. We can have let's have plain boxes.
Okay.
You know, for
River Reserve has that.
Yeah, like River Reserve and Clint. You know, there's a lot of responsible ways I think that we can regulate this without prohibiting adults from making choices on choosing a product that they want.
Okay, Sarah.
I mean, it's extremely dangerous to hear the adult choice language because that's tobacco industry language. That's what the industry wanted us to believe about cigarettes, even after we knew, and they especially knew how harmful they were. And I will say, not just people, it's an expert panel, but the Public Health England is not using studies that are emerging now. And if you look at those studies, they're not saying these are harmless products. The more and more studies that are coming out, are they less harmful than cigarettes? Probably. But that is such a low bar to set for any consumer product. And you read up, the dancing unicorns, it's where the products are sold. I mean, they're sold everywhere now. Is there some model that gets the biggest public health benefit we can get out of these for that population of adult smokers who is probably not the broad population of people who are using cigarettes, but for that subset of the population can get a supported quit attempt, because in the one trial we have where e-cigarettes help people quit, it was a supported quit attempt. It wasn't take this, go home, dual use it, keep using it, cycle back and forth between the two products. It was cessation oriented, which I think makes a big difference. How do we find that public health benefit, which we're still learning what it is, and how do we protect youth from addiction at the same time? And how do we protect the adults or enable adults to make informed choices? I'm not protecting them. I think public health gets in trouble a lot for that. How do we let adults enable informed choices where they know that using both products at once isn't going to make them healthier? In fact, it's probably just going to double down the nicotine addiction they already have.
We need to wrap up the show. Thank you for all these different thoughts. If you wouldn't mind keeping it to the 30-second version here, Josh. I know as state lawmakers are thinking about potentially a permanent ban on flavored vapes. Advice to them as they start the new session in a couple months here.
Let's look at a tried and true policy that the UK has at capping the nicotine concentration and capping the bottle size. They have a 1.6% youth usage rate. Let's not reinvent the wheel and continue to put all these mom and pop shop businesses that do focus on education and cessation, like myself, where I quit smoking using a vaporizer to help other people find the same freedom from nicotine.
Sarah, do you support this permanent ban on flavored vapes? The state's really considering it this year.
I'm going to start with what Josh recommended. I'm going to say we have to look at what is the best regulation we can do around flavors and really get as much knowledge in the room about what are the cessation possibilities. I think the legislature has to again look at that $500 million we're getting to not address this issue at all. And I think we have to look at where the products are sold, and if we want that UK rate, we have to ban online advertising. That's how you get there.
Okay. Thank you both very much for this back and forth. I should point out a final note. If you do need help with quitting vaping or smoking, there's a new app that can help. Find it at doh.wa.gov/quit. We'll be right back.
Temporary ban seems actually surprisingly reasonable.
A ban is good for the teenagers.
People are still gonna smoke.
It's like guns, they got to enforce the laws that are already there.
We'd like to know what you think. Send us an email at contact@seattlechannel.org or find us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Before we close today, it's time for our weekly CIO poll. Do you support the flavored vape ban in our state? Yes, no, or are you undecided? We want to know what you think. Cast your vote and weigh in with your comments at our website, seattlechannel.org/cityinsideout. While you're there, you can watch our programs online anytime. Coming up next time, there are more than 1,000 so-called prolific offenders that keep cycling in and out of the criminal justice system. Why is this happening, and what's the best way to preserve public safety? We look at the costs and challenges next time on City Inside Out. I hope you join us.